become one of the world's most vicious criminal, the Medellín Cartel.
Pablo Escobar.
Pablo Escobar.
El Chapo Guzman is a brand.
Killing of Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar is sending a tougher message. At least that is the hope of Colombian and U.S. officials. Mr. Escobar was gunned down yesterday.
The government guarantees that he won't be harmed. Escobar, a ruthless killer, escaped from his own luxury prison.
1976. Medellín, Colombia.
He's a mystique.
He's a psychopath.
And minimize the risk.
As you can see, the tunnel has lighting and runs south down into Mexico.
I would compare it to Amazon.
Netflix and Facebook, they were making roughly the same amount of money. In the narco world, eliminating your competition.
Chapo was the #1 bad guy in the world, but what set him apart was he was one hell of a CEO, if you can believe it.
For years, the world believed that Pablo Escobar and the Medellín Cartel were the most powerful criminal force in Colombia. Their bombs, their assassinations, and their open war against the government dominated every headline. But while Medellín burned the country to ash, another empire was quietly rising, one built not on chaos, but calculation. An empire so vast, so disciplined, and so deeply rooted in corruption that even the White House struggled to understand how these men kept escaping the spotlight. This was the cartel that didn't need to blow up buildings. They owned the people inside them. This is the untold story of the Cali Cartel, the criminal organization that perfected the art of invisibility, controlled 90% of the world's cocaine market, and became the most profitable drug empire in human history, not through terror, but through intelligence, organization, and a level of political influence that rivaled governments. This is the story of the men who outsmarted Escobar, outmaneuvered the DEA, bought presidents, controlled cities, and built the closest thing the criminal world has ever seen to a corporation. A corporation called the Gentlemen of Cali, and their rise would reshape the world forever. Before anyone outside Colombia had heard their names, before they built mansions, bought soccer teams, and flooded the world with cocaine, the men who would one day form the Cali Cartel were just 3 young hustlers trying to survive in a country collapsing under corruption and inequality. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela, the future mastermind of the organization, grew up with nothing. No privilege, no wealth, just a sharp mind and a hunger to escape poverty. His early jobs were humble. A delivery boy, a small shopkeeper, but even then, people around him noticed something unusual. Gilberto planned everything. Every move, every conversation, every opportunity. He didn't like chaos, he liked control. His younger brother Miguel carried the opposite energy. Quiet, observant, calculating. If Gilberto was the strategist, Miguel was the executor, the man who made things happen behind the scenes. And then there was Jose Chepe Santa Cruz Londoño, their childhood friend. Where the brothers were disciplined, Chepe was bold. He took risks, chased adrenaline, and had a talent for solving problems, sometimes violently, sometimes cleverly. Together, these 3 men formed a triangle of intelligence, loyalty, and ambition that would one day become the backbone of an empire. But their first business was not cocaine. It wasn't even marijuana. It was kidnapping. In the 1970s, Colombia was descending into chaos. Guerrilla groups, corrupt politicians, and rising criminal networks all fought for power. Middle-class and wealthy citizens lived in constant fear of being abducted. And into this environment, Gilberto, Miguel, and Chepe created a gang known as Los Chepos, specializing in high-profit, low-visibility kidnappings. They were organized, they were smart, and they were terrifyingly efficient. One kidnapping alone earned them nearly $1 million, an unimaginable amount in Colombia at that time. Money opened doors, money revealed opportunities, and one opportunity above all would change their lives: cocaine. At the time, cocaine wasn't the global giant it would eventually become, but the market was exploding in the United States, its demand fueled by Hollywood culture, rising nightlife, and a generation searching for escape. The three young men didn't hesitate. They traveled through Central America, entered the United States illegally, and saw with their own eyes the insane profits waiting for anyone who could move pure cocaine north. A kilo cost a few $1,000s in Colombia, but in New York it sold for $50,000 to $60,000. They didn't just see a business, they saw a future. They returned home, partnered with early traffickers, and began building the foundations of what would soon become the most successful cocaine network in the world. Not loud, not violent, not like Medellín. Smart, hidden, disciplined. The world wouldn't learn the name Cali Cartel for years, but the gentlemen were already rising. As the 1970s came to a close, Colombia watched one cartel rise through explosions and fear. Medellín. Pablo Escobar's organization dominated headlines, devastated cities, and forced the government and United States into a desperate fight for survival. But in Cali, something very different was happening. While Escobar thrived in chaos, the Cali Cartel mastered the opposite, invisibility. Gilberto knew something Escobar never understood. The most powerful man in the room was never the one holding the gun. It was the man who could walk past a police officer and make him smile, the man who could sit at a table with presidents and make them listen. And so, the gentlemen of Cali built their empire like a multinational corporation, structured, disciplined, and almost boring on the surface. No flashy cars in public, no ostentatious display of wealth, no screaming, no threats, no premature violence. If Medellín was a storm, Cali was the tide, slow, quiet, but unstoppable. The first major breakthrough came not through force, but through organization. The cartel divided its operations into small, specialized cells, one for transportation, one for finance, one for money laundering, one for intelligence, and one for corruption. Each cell operated independently, with almost no knowledge of the others. If a member was arrested, he could reveal nothing. The leadership became invisible, even to their own employees. It was the kind of structure every intelligence agency feared and admired. While Escobar hid in the mountains, hunted and paranoid, Cali leaders were attending nightclubs, investing in shopping malls, negotiating with politicians, and donating funds to local hospitals. To the public, they were businessmen. To the city, they were benefactors. To the poor, they were providers. At a time when the government failed to protect its people, the cartel stepped in. And here lay the true genius of Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela. He didn't rule through terror. He ruled through dependence. If you lived in Cali, the cartel was woven into the fabric of your daily life. They owned taxis and telephone lines. They controlled neighborhoods and businesses. They employed thousands of ordinary citizens who had no idea they were indirectly part of a criminal empire. If you tried to enter Cali, the cartel knew. If you tried to leave Cali, the cartel knew. If you lived in Cali, you belonged to them. By the early 1980s, the organization was preparing for a transformation. Cocaine trafficking was no longer a side profit. It was becoming the backbone of their power, and no one played a more critical role in this transition than the newest addition to the group, a quiet, discreet, and unexpectedly brutal trafficker named Helmer Pacho Herrera. Long before Pacho Herrera ever sat at the same table as the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, his name was already whispered in certain circles of the Colombian underworld. Not loudly, not with fear, and not with the theatrical awe that surrounded Pablo Escobar. Pacho's reputation was different, clean, quiet, efficient, the kind of man who didn't attract attention because he didn't want to. In a business drowning in egos, Pacho was an anomaly. While traffickers all over Colombia flashed gold chains, luxury cars, and women on their arms, Pacho preferred simplicity. A modest watch, a clean shirt, a polite smile. He was the kind of man you could pass on the street without ever knowing you just brushed shoulders with one of the future architects of the world's most sophisticated criminal empire. But behind the quiet exterior was a man who understood the mechanics of power better than most politicians. He had grown up watching the country tear itself apart. Corruption, guerrilla warfare, poverty, and the rapid expansion of the cocaine trade were shaping Colombia into something unrecognizable. Where others saw danger, Pacho saw opportunity. And long before Cali recruited him, he built something of his own, a small but extremely profitable cocaine distribution network in the United States. Unlike Escobar, who forced his way into markets with violence, Pacho built relationships. He worked with Mexican intermediaries, developed strategic partnerships, and used charm instead of threats. His product moved quietly and reliably, and his business made millions without leaving a single footprint behind. By the time Cali noticed him, he had already become a ghost in the cocaine economy, present everywhere, visible nowhere. When Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela first heard his name, he was intrigued. When Miguel heard it, he was impressed. But when Chepe heard it, he said only one sentence: "If this man is with us, no one will ever stop us." Bringing Pacho into the Cali machine wasn't just a recruitment, it was an evolution. From the moment he joined the cartel, the empire transformed. Pacho didn't sit back quietly or wait for permission to prove himself. He took over the most critical region in the cocaine pipeline, New York City, the beating heart of American drug consumption, the gold mine, the battlefield. Most traffickers feared New York. The DEA presence was immense, the risks fatal. But Pacho? He organized New York like a Fortune 500 company. He established distributors, created secure storage locations, built networks inside nightclubs and high-end bars, and ensured every gram of cocaine had a buyer before it even arrived. It wasn't brute force, it wasn't chaos, it was logistics, discipline, and cold ambition. Whenever a problem appeared, Pacho didn't panic. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply solved the problem. If a distributor stole money, he vanished. If a competitor challenged his territory, they quietly disappeared. If a shipment went missing, within 48 hours, he found who took it, who sold it, and who benefited from it. No noise, no spectacle, no newspaper headlines. But beneath that calm efficiency lay something darker, something even Cali's leaders didn't expect. Pacho Herrera, for all his intelligence, had a violent streak buried deep inside him. Unlike Escobar, who used violence to send a message, Pacho used violence only when necessary. But when he did, it was terrifying. He didn't kill to show power. He killed to eliminate obstacles. His methods were precise, calculated, and often merciless. He treated violence like a surgeon treats a scalpel, coldly, carefully, and with absolute certainty. This made him invaluable. While Gilberto built the strategy, Miguel handled the finances, and Chepe controlled distribution. Pacho ensured one thing above all: no one, anywhere in the world, dared stand in the way of the Cali Cartel. And surprisingly, Pacho was also the cartel's most discreet member. He refused interviews. He avoided public appearances. He lived behind layers of false identities. Even within the cartel, he remained a mystery. But the combination of his skills, his intelligence, his silence, his ruthlessness, completed the Cali leadership like the final piece of a puzzle. Now Cali had a mastermind strategist, Gilberto, a financial genius, Miguel, a street-level disciplinarian and distributor, Chepe, a logistics king and surgical enforcer, Pacho. Together, these four men didn't just run a cartel. They created a worldwide cocaine corporation, organized, structured, untouchable. By the mid-1980s, the Cali Cartel was no longer rising. They were ruling, but their rise brought them closer to a man whose ego, violence, and fury would eventually ignite a war that would tear Colombia apart. That man was Pablo Escobar. For a brief moment in Colombia's chaotic history, an uneasy balance existed. two empires growing in the same kingdom but pretending not to see each other. On one side of the mountains lived Pablo Escobar and the Medellín Cartel, volatile, explosive, unpredictable. On the other side, in the city of Cali, a quieter force was evolving into something far more dangerous. The Cali Cartel operated by a different philosophy. Pablo ruled through fear, Cali ruled through invisibility. Pablo bought loyalty with violence, Cali bought loyalty with money. Pablo wanted to be seen, Cali needed to stay hidden, and for a while the arrangement almost felt peaceful. But peace among criminals is never real, only borrowed. Every year both cartels grew richer. Every year their roots expanded. Every year the cocaine flooding into the United States multiplied. And every year Pablo Escobar made himself more visible. He blew up airplanes, assassinated politicians, declared war on the government, and terrified entire cities. His violence forced the Colombian government into one of the most intense security operations in the nation's history. Police checkpoints, military patrols, DEA involvement, border crackdowns. Every explosion on the evening news wasn't just a tragedy, it was a spotlight, and it landed on every trafficker in Colombia. The men in Cali understood something Pablo never did. The more noise you make, the faster the empire collapses. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela watched the news like a man studying a storm approaching the coast. His mind didn't react with anger or fear, only calculation. Miguel analyzed the numbers. Chepe studied the street networks. Pacho dissected the security consequences. And the more they analyzed, the clearer it became. Escobar wasn't just a threat to the government, he was a threat to their future, because every bomb Escobar detonated made Cali's dream nearly impossible. Cali didn't want to remain criminals forever. They wanted transformation. Banks, companies, shopping malls, soccer teams, they wanted legitimacy. Pablo Escobar destroyed legitimacy. His war against the state forced the world to stare at Colombia with suspicion. His attacks forced the United States to tighten border surveillance. His public threats forced investigations into every wealthy Colombian businessman. You couldn't build an empire quietly while someone else was screaming loudly next door, and the Cali bosses had had enough. The moment everything changed came not with a bomb, not with a murder, but with a decision Pablo made in 1982, one that shocked even his allies. Pablo Escobar entered politics. He didn't walk into politics quietly. He arrived as he did everything, boldly, loudly, fearlessly. He bought votes, he bribed officials, he intimidated journalists. For Pablo, the Colombian Congress was not a place of governance, it was a throne. But for Cali, it was a ticking bomb. A drug trafficker in Congress meant the end of subtlety. It meant global scrutiny. It meant the United States tightening its grip on Colombia's political system. And worst of all, it meant Pablo Escobar was no longer just a criminal. He was attempting to become a ruler. Gilberto saw the future clearly. If Pablo gained political power, the Medellín Cartel wouldn't just dominate the drug trade, they would dominate the entire country, and that Cali could not allow. Inside Cali's leadership meetings, the tone shifted. Discussions grew sharper, accusations grew heavier. The cartel's dreams of transitioning into legitimate global businessmen began to look fragile. The gentlemen of Cali didn't fear Pablo's violence, they feared his ambition, because an ambitious Pablo Escobar was uncontrollable, and an uncontrollable Pablo Escobar could burn the entire country to ash, including Cali. By the time Pablo was publicly humiliated and expelled from Congress, his pride ruptured. He didn't walk out of politics defeated, he walked out furious. The humiliation triggered something inside him, something unstable. He began attacking politicians, judges, journalists. He sent assassins into government buildings. He planted bombs in the capital. Colombia became a battlefield. And in the shadows, the gentlemen of Cali watched the chaos grow and realized that the balance between the two empires had shattered. Pablo Escobar had become bigger than the drug trade. He was now the single most dangerous man in the country, and his rage was pushing the government and eventually the United States to turn their attention on every cartel, including Cali. What had once been a cold rivalry became a powder keg. The gentlemen of Cali had held their silence for long enough. They had built quietly, patiently, and intelligently, but now their future was being threatened by one man's obsession. The storm was coming, and Cali had a decision to make: keep avoiding Medellín or go to war. For years, the Cali and Medellín cartels existed like two predators hunting in the same jungle, dangerous, aware of each other, but careful not to collide. They even cooperated on occasion. When guerrilla groups began kidnapping traffickers in the early 1980s, the two cartels united briefly in mutual self-defense. The alliance wasn't built on trust, it was built on necessity, but it showed that the two empires could coexist as long as no one tried to dominate the other. That fragile peace dissolved the moment Pablo Escobar allowed his pride to outrun his intelligence. When the Minister of Justice publicly exposed Pablo's criminal past inside Congress, calling him a murderer, smuggler, and trafficker, Pablo's political career imploded in a single afternoon. The humiliation was historic. Newspapers mocked him, TV stations replayed the confrontation, politicians whispered that the country had dodged a bullet, and Pablo Escobar, a man who lived by ego and revenge, quietly wrote every one of their names down. The assassination of the Minister of Justice was not simply an act of revenge, it was a declaration of war. Overnight, Pablo transformed from a rising political figure into the most hunted criminal in the nation. But his fury didn't stop at government officials. He turned his wrath toward anyone who threatened his influence: judges, police chiefs, presidential candidates, journalists. Colombia had seen violence before, but nothing like this. Bombs detonated in downtown Bogotá. Airplanes exploded mid-flight. Entire neighborhoods shook under the force of car bombs. Even foreign agents weren't spared. Pablo believed he could intimidate a nation into submission. Cali believed Pablo was destroying the entire business for everyone. Inside the Cali boardroom, the four leaders gathered behind soundproof doors, surrounded by blueprints, maps, wiretaps, and financial reports. For the first time, their calm, corporate-style meetings turned heated. Miguel argued numbers. Escobar's chaos was costing them millions. Pacho argued security. Every explosion doubled the risk of U.S. intervention. Chepe argued street control. Medellín violence was now spilling into Cali's territories, and Gilberto, the quiet strategist, argued something even more damning. Pablo Escobar had become unpredictable, which made him the single greatest threat to their long-term survival. The Cali bosses didn't fear Pablo for his firepower. They feared him because he didn't care about consequences. While Cali bribed judges, Pablo blew them up. While Cali infiltrated law enforcement, Pablo declared war on them. While Cali built businesses, Pablo bombed cities. While Cali worked quietly, Pablo wanted headlines. Worst of all, Pablo saw himself not just as a trafficker, but as a revolutionary. He thought he could bend the state to his will, and if he could bend the state, he could certainly try to control his rivals. That was the moment everything changed. A single event brought the simmering tension to a boil. It began in New York, not Colombia. Two low-level traffickers got into a dispute over a woman. One murdered the other in a nightclub bathroom. The dead man's friends demanded revenge. Word reached Medellín. Pablo Escobar promised to fix the problem his way, quickly and violently. But the killer panicked. He had one person left to turn to, a former prison cellmate named Helmer Pacho Herrera, the quiet, elegant, ruthless Cali kingpin who controlled New York distribution. Pacho didn't defend the killer's actions, but he refused to hand him over to Medellín. For Pablo Escobar, this was unforgivable. Pacho was not some street dealer. He was one of Cali's 4 top bosses, untouchable in most circumstances. But Pablo saw it differently. He took Pacho's refusal as a personal insult, an act of disrespect, and a challenge to his authority. In Pablo's world, challenges were not discussed, they were eliminated. When Medellín sent word back to Cali, "Deliver the man, or die with him," the room where the Cali bosses met fell silent for the first time in years. The killer was insignificant, but Escobar's demand was not. Handing the man over meant bending the knee to Medellín. Refusing meant war. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela leaned back in his chair and said something that would change the course of history. "If we bow to him one time, we bow forever." Pacho agreed. Miguel agreed. Chepe agreed. The decision was unanimous. The response sent to Medellín was simple: no. On the other end of the phone, Escobar's voice froze with rage. There was no negotiation, no threats, no final warning, just one sentence: "Then this is war." And with that, two of the richest, most powerful criminal empires on earth prepared to destroy each other. Cali sharpened its knives. Medellín loaded its guns. Colombia braced for the greatest narco war the world had ever seen. And for the first time, Pablo Escobar realized something he had never considered before. The gentlemen of Cali were willing to kill the king. For the first time in years, Pablo Escobar felt something he wasn't used to feeling: opposition. Until now, everyone in Colombia either feared him, obeyed him, or died. That was the order. That was the world, as Pablo Escobar understood it. But the four gentlemen of Cali didn't play by his rules, and they certainly didn't fear him. Their refusal didn't just bruise Pablo's ego, it pierced straight through it. And Escobar, the man who once declared himself the future president of Colombia, had now been openly defied. Inside Medellín, Pablo paced across the marble floor of his safe house, breathing hard, almost shaking. His men watched in silence. They knew the signs. A storm was coming. "Pacho dies first," he declared, "and then the rest." But what Pablo failed to understand was that the Cali bosses were nothing like the street-level traffickers he was used to crushing. They weren't cowards, they weren't impulsive, and they didn't operate alone. Pablo was one man with an army. Cali was four minds sharing one empire. The difference would soon matter. While Pablo barked orders, Cali met quietly in a private home in the affluent southern district of the city. No armed children, no chaos, no shouting, just calm voices and cold intelligence. Miguel, always the numbers man, laid it out bluntly. Medellín's bombs were drawing global attention. International pressure was growing. The United States was turning its eyes to Colombia, and not gently. Every explosion Pablo triggered made both cartels more vulnerable, but only one of them could truly afford it. The other, Cali, was too deeply embedded in politics, business, banks, and government contracts to survive that kind of attention. Chaos was Pablo's playground, but Cali's empire demanded silence. So the question wasn't whether to respond, it was how. Gilberto, the gay chess player, didn't believe in emotional decisions. He believed in strategy, and he knew exactly where Pablo Escobar was weakest. Not in firepower, not in money, not even in influence. Pablo's weakness was his pride. Escobar believed he was invincible, untouchable, protected by the barrios, loved by the poor, feared by the elite. He thought of himself as a modern-day Robin Hood, except Robin Hood didn't assassinate presidential candidates. Cali didn't want to match Pablo's brutality. That wasn't their style. Instead, they would suffocate him, quietly, efficiently, without ever stepping into the spotlight. So they began their war the way a surgeon begins an operation, slowly, carefully, with precise incisions. The first move was subtle. Medellín's money launderers began disappearing. Not murdered, not kidnapped, simply removed, vanished. A few of Pablo's offshore accounts suddenly went dark. A handful of his routes through the Caribbean were exposed to US authorities. A storage warehouse he used near Buenaventura mysteriously burned down in the middle of the night. None of these incidents were explosive enough to make the news, but they were devastating to Pablo's logistics. His empire relied on constant motion. Interrupt the motion, and the machinery starts to decay. Pablo didn't see it as a coincidence. He knew exactly who was behind it. "You think you can hide behind your lawyers and your money?" he growled one night as he slammed a phone onto the table. "You think you can beat me with paperwork?" His men exchanged nervous glances. No one said anything. Everyone understood the truth. Cali had chosen a battlefield Pablo didn't like and didn't control. But Pablo Escobar was not a man who waited. He was a man who attacked. If Cali wanted a quiet war, Pablo would turn it into a loud one. One of Medellin's hitmen, a teenager barely 18, sped through the streets of Cali on a stolen motorcycle carrying a backpack. Inside were packages of dynamite wired to a simple detonator. His target, a chain of pharmacies owned by the Rodriguez brothers. Pharmacies that laundered millions and kept their legal businesses afloat. Escobar's message was unmistakable. If Cali liked to play businessman, then Pablo would burn their businesses to the ground. The bomb detonated at 9:10 p.m. Glass shattered, flames erupted, and the entire block shook. A second bomb followed, then a third. The explosions weren't meant to destroy the pharmacies. They were meant to embarrass the Cali bosses on their own turf, to show the world and the underworld that Pablo still held the crown as the most feared man in Colombia. For a moment, it worked. The city of Cali trembled. Residents fled the streets. Politicians panicked. Newspapers declared open war between the two cartels. But inside the Cali boardroom, something different happened. The room didn't erupt. No one shouted. No one panicked. Miguel quietly folded the newspaper in front of him and took a slow breath. Gilberto didn't move at all. He simply whispered, "Now he's exposed himself," because Pablo had made a mistake that only corporate criminals would notice. Explosions create pressure. Pressure creates investigations. Investigations create opportunities, and Cali would use every opportunity to tighten the net around Medellin's king. What Pablo believed was an attack, Cali saw as an opening. The war had officially begun, and neither side would ever be the same again. After the pharmacy bombings, Cali understood something crystal clear. Pablo Escobar would not stop. He would not negotiate, compromise, or retreat. He would not share power. He would burn down half the country before surrendering an inch. The gentlemen of Cali had built their empire on order, discipline, and silence. Escobar built his on terror. The two worlds could never coexist. So Cali prepared for war, not the chaotic street war Pablo wanted, but a strategic, surgical, intelligence-driven war. A war fought from the shadows, with information rather than bullets. Their first objective was simple. They needed a way to reach Pablo Escobar himself. But Pablo was a ghost. He moved constantly between safe houses. He relied only on his closest men. He built fortresses, underground bunkers, jungle hideouts. Helicopters brought him food. Armored trucks transported him at night. He surrounded himself with commandos and sicarios who worshipped him like a legend. Reaching him was nearly impossible, unless you had someone who understood how to hunt a ghost. That man was Jorge Salcedo. Salcedo wasn't a trafficker. He wasn't a street killer. He wasn't even a criminal in the traditional sense. He was an educated man, a former military operative with a mind built for complex warfare, a tactician, a man who understood surveillance, counter-surveillance, and the art of hunting targets who could not afford to be caught. Salcedo had helped guard the Cali bosses for years, building security systems, recruitment pipelines, escape plans, and communications. He thought his job was to prevent violence, not create it. But when he was summoned by the Rodriguez brothers one humid afternoon, he quickly learned his role was about to change forever. Miguel didn't waste time with small talk. "Jorge," he said, leaning forward. "We need you to do something we've never asked anyone to do before." Salcedo waited. "We need Pablo Escobar gone." The room went still. Not a breath moved. Salcedo stared at them, unsure if he'd misheard. He hadn't. It wasn't a request. It was an assignment, one that could alter the future of Colombia and end his life. To kill Pablo Escobar, they needed more than local hitmen. Medellín had eyes everywhere. Every unfamiliar face was suspicious. Every outsider entering the city risked immediate execution. They needed professionals, soldiers, men who had trained for battlefield-style operations. So the Cali bosses funded a covert plan. Summon a small group of British mercenaries, elite former soldiers with combat experience in the Middle East and Africa. Men who didn't speak Spanish, had no ties to Medellín, and could disappear after the mission without leaving a trace. The mercenaries arrived quietly. No uniforms, no flags, no glory, just a job. Their mission was bold and simple in theory. Kill Pablo Escobar on his own ranch, Hacienda Nápoles, a massive estate with private zoos, lakes, helipads, gardens, and dozens of security posts. But to the mercenaries, this was just another war zone. Their plan was to fly in at dawn in a helicopter disguised as a government aircraft. Soldiers entered the property all the time. Escobar was used to controlling them, bribing them, intimidating them. A government chopper would not appear suspicious. Once inside, the plan was to land near Pablo's swimming pool, where he often relaxed every morning, surrounded only by a few men. They would strike fast, eliminate resistance, and extract. A clean, efficient kill. A billionaire cartel boss gone in minutes. It could have worked. But war is never flawless, even when planned by geniuses. The first surveillance flight over Hacienda Nápoles proved how dangerous the mission would be. Pablo's men patrolled the perimeter. Lookouts stood on rooftops with rifles. Dogs roamed the property. Armored vehicles were stationed around the estate like a private military base. Still, the mercenaries were confident. Their weapons were ready. Their gear was prepared. The plan was locked in. But the mountains of Colombia are unpredictable, far more than any enemy. On the morning of the operation, the sky darkened. Clouds rolled over the ridges. Rain hammered the helicopter blades. Wind roared like a living animal. Visibility dropped to zero. The pilot fought the controls, gripping the stick so tightly his knuckles turned white. Salcedo, wedged between crates of explosives, felt the aircraft buck like a wild horse. A sudden downdraft yanked the helicopter sideways. One of the mercenaries shouted a warning, but it was too late. The rotor clipped a tree. Metal screamed. The helicopter spun out of control, and in an instant it slammed into the side of a mountain. The crash was violent. Explosions rocked the forest. The pilot died instantly. The mercenaries were thrown into the mud, injured and disoriented. Salcedo dragged himself from the wreckage, blood on his face, lungs burning. The mission was dead, the team was scattered, and worst of all, Pablo Escobar had no idea how close he had come to dying that morning. The Cali bosses were furious, not because they had failed, but because fate had saved Escobar's life. But the war was far from over. As Salcedo lay recovering from the crash, the country around him was about to ignite in ways no one had seen before, because Pablo Escobar was now hunted by not just Cali, but by the Colombian government, the United States, and a new force rising in the shadows. And Cali was preparing its deadliest weapon yet. After the failed helicopter strike, the Cali bosses understood something they had always known but never admitted. Killing Pablo Escobar would require more than precision, more than strategy, more than money. It would require a monster as ruthless as the one they were fighting, and that monster was about to be born. While Cali regrouped after the crash, Pablo Escobar was living in his own nightmare. The country he once controlled with fear was slipping from his fingers. His organization was shrinking. His allies were dying. His power was fading. But the real threat came from something he didn't expect. People were switching sides, some out of fear, some out of revenge. Some because Medellín once the richest cartel on earth, was now bleeding money faster than Pablo could stop it. And when criminals start losing money, they start losing loyalty. Inside the Cali headquarters, the Rodriguez brothers read the situation perfectly. Pablo was no longer a king, he was a wounded predator. And wounded predators are the easiest to corner, but also the most dangerous. They needed an army, not mercenaries, not spies, not traffickers. An army made of people who hated Pablo Escobar more than they feared him. And there was no shortage of enemies. Former Medellín members whose families had been executed for disloyalty, businessmen whose factories Pablo bombed when they refused extortion, politicians who saw friends murdered, police commanders whose officers were blown to pieces in the streets, civilians who lost loved ones in Pablo's terror campaign. Colombia was full of people who wanted Pablo Escobar dead. They just needed someone to organize them. Cali stepped forward. They gave this new faction a name, one that would be whispered in fear for decades. Los Pepes, los perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, the people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. But the name was a lie. Not everyone in Los Pepes was a victim. Many were simply killers, mercenaries, paramilitary leaders, or old enemies of Medellín who saw an opportunity for revenge and profit. Cali didn't care. They needed results. Los Pepes needed backing. It was a perfect match. And suddenly, a force fueled by rage and funded by billions was unleashed into the streets. They began quietly. A safe house burned down. A money courier disappeared. A mid-level sicario found dead in a ditch. Then they escalated. Los Pepes started publishing lists, actual printed lists, naming Pablo's associates. These lists appeared on walls, in newspapers, even in police stations. A death notice disguised as a warning: stay with Escobar and you die with Escobar. Within weeks they struck again, and again, and again. Pablo's lawyers were executed. His accountants were executed. His allies' houses were blown up. Entire families, including women and children, were targeted. The message was cold and unmistakable. Pablo Escobar wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the hunted. And Los Pepes were not bound by rules, morality, or fear. They killed without hesitation. They tortured without shame. They acted publicly, shamelessly, confident no one would touch them, because Cali wasn't the only one supporting Los Pepes. Behind closed doors, a quiet alliance formed between Cali's hit squads, the Castano paramilitary clan, former Medellín deserters, and elements within the Colombian government who wanted Escobar erased from history. And though no one would ever officially admit it, Los Pepes were getting intelligence directly from police and military units. Even the search block, the elite task force hunting Escobar, looked the other way. Some say they cooperated. Some say they shared intel. Some say they simply allowed Los Pepes to do the dirty work they themselves could not legally do. Whatever the truth, Los Pepes cut off Pablo Escobar's arms and legs in a matter of months. His lieutenants began surrendering. His hitmen deserted. His properties burned. His safe houses collapsed one by one. He couldn't trust anyone anymore. He couldn't even trust his family. Every phone call he made risked being traced. Every movement was watched. Every hideout became temporary. The man who once terrorized a nation now ran through back alleys like a fugitive, jumping from safe house to safe house, sleeping with a rifle under his pillow, his beard growing, his clothes dirty, his health deteriorating. He had become a shadow of himself, a paranoid outlaw clinging to a collapsing empire. And Cali watched from their quiet boardrooms as the walls closed in. Instead of bullets, they used information. Instead of car bombs, they used intelligence. Instead of chaos, they used precision. Los Pepes became the blade. Cali became the hand that guided it. The balance of power had shifted permanently. The invincible Pablo Escobar was now bleeding from 1,000 cuts, and the final one was coming soon. Delivered not by Los Pepes, not by mercenaries, not by rival cartels, but by a single mistake Pablo would make. A mistake that would reveal his location and end the reign of the most feared criminal in modern history. By late 1993, Pablo Escobar was no longer a king. He was a ghost, a hunted animal moving from roof to roof, dragging his last loyal bodyguard and a small duffel bag filled with cash that could no longer buy him safety. He was thin, exhausted, breathing through paranoia. Every knock on the door sounded like death. Every shadow felt like a trap. Every voice might be a traitor. His wife and children were in hiding. His brother was in prison. His trusted lieutenants were dead, captured, or in hiding themselves. Pablo Escobar was alone. Los Pepes were destroying everything around him. His safe houses, his accountants, his network, his money, piece by piece. They weren't trying to kill him quickly. They were trying to suffocate him. And it was working. The Cali bosses believed in patience. Kill everyone around Escobar, and he would eventually expose himself. And he did. Not with violence, not with a shipment, not with a bribe, not with a hostage, but with a simple phone call. On December 2nd, 1993, at around 3 in the afternoon, Pablo contacted his son, a short, emotional call filled with fear, exhaustion, and a desperate desire to hear a familiar voice. He thought the moment was safe. He thought he was careful. He thought he was smarter than the entire Colombian military. But technology had changed, and so had his enemies. The call was traced instantly. A signal, a direction, a location. The search block tightened a circle around a quiet neighborhood in Medellín. Los Pepes positioned themselves nearby. Even the CIA monitored the operation from the background. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a coordinated closing of a chapter the entire world was watching. On the second floor of a modest house, Pablo Escobar sensed something he couldn't explain. Maybe instinct, maybe paranoia, maybe destiny. He grabbed his gun. He told his bodyguard to get ready, but it was too late. The search block stormed the street. An officer shouted directions. Another kicked down the front door. Gunfire erupted outside. Windows shattered. Neighbors screamed. Pablo sprinted to the rooftop, climbing out through a small window. A man who once ruled a nation was now running across red clay tiles, desperate and breathless, looking for any escape. But the rooftops had no mercy. The police climbed after him. Bullets cracked through the cold December air. Pablo slipped, regained balance, fired wildly behind him. The entire world would later argue about what happened next. Some say a police sniper fired the fatal shot. Some say he was surrounded and gunned down. Some whisper he took his own life to avoid capture. But one truth echoed through the mountains of Medellín. The king was gone. Pablo Escobar, the man who bombed airplanes, bribed presidents, terrorized cities, and built an empire of cocaine, lay dead on a rooftop, his body resting awkwardly against a wall, blood staining the tiles beneath him. For years, he had believed he was untouchable. For years, he fought every enemy he created. For years, he tried to outrun death. But death doesn't run. It waits. The search block officers celebrated, posing beside the body with raised fists and victorious shouts. A photo was taken, one that would circle the globe within hours. When news of Escobar's death reached Cali, something strange happened. There was no cheering, no shouting, no celebration, just silence. A long, heavy silence. Gilberto simply nodded. Miguel closed his eyes, exhaling deeply. Pacho smirked faintly, as if savoring a private victory. The war they began had finally ended. The enemy they feared was gone. The one man who could have destroyed them was now lying on a rooftop. And in that silence, every Cali boss understood the same cold truth. With Escobar gone, the United States would no longer be distracted, no longer divided, no longer split between two enemies. Now, all of Washington's attention, all of its resources, intelligence, and fury would turn toward one target, the Cali Cartel, the most powerful criminal empire on Earth. Their greatest victory had just opened the door to their greatest threat. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The death of Pablo Escobar should have felt like a triumph for the Cali Cartel, a moment of victory, a moment of dominance. After all, the man who had terrorized Colombia for over a decade was gone, and with Medellín shattered, Cali now stood alone as the most powerful cocaine empire in the world. For a few weeks, the city buzzed with quiet pride. No bombs, no gunfights, no chaos. Cali felt safe, almost civilized. But inside the cartel boardrooms, a different emotion was growing, not celebration, but fear. The Rodriguez brothers understood something most people didn't. Pablo Escobar had been a shield, a monstrous, violent, unpredictable shield, but a shield nonetheless. As long as Escobar was alive, the United States had treated the war on drugs like a fire that needed to be contained. Everything revolved around Medellín. Everything revolved around Escobar. Now that he was dead, the fire had shifted, and all its heat, all its attention, all its political pressure turned toward Cali. The Cold War was over. American intelligence agencies were no longer busy with Soviet threats. Washington needed a new enemy, and they found one in Gilberto, Miguel, Pacho Herrera, and Jose Santa Cruz. Almost immediately, the DEA changed strategy. Medellín had required brute force and military coordination. Cali would require something else: patience, intelligence, deep infiltration, financial warfare, political pressure. In the White House, advisors made it clear the Cali Cartel is now the most powerful criminal organization in the world. They must be dismantled. And with that, the clock on Cali's empire began to tick. But the Cali bosses had problems of their own, problems that had nothing to do with the DEA. With Medellín destroyed, the market exploded. Money poured in faster than ever before. Billions of dollars a year. So much cash that warehouses filled floor to ceiling in plastic-wrapped bricks. But money is not peace. Money is not loyalty. Money is not safety. Money attracts enemies, and Cali was surrounded by them. The police were no longer willing to look the other way. Politicians were no longer willing to pretend. The newspapers were no longer willing to stay silent. Even the public sentiment began to shift. For years, the Cali Cartel had used corruption instead of violence. They bought silence. They bought loyalty. They bought protection. But public tolerance for cartels had evaporated after Escobar's terror campaign. Colombia was tired, exhausted, traumatized. The people wanted a villain to blame, and with Pablo gone, the next villain was obvious. Inside Cali's headquarters, Gilberto knew they were running out of time. He began planning an exit strategy, the one escape route he believed could save them: negotiation. He wanted to strike a deal with the Colombian government, a deal that would protect their wealth, their families, their legitimate businesses, and allow them to retire gracefully, serve a symbolic prison sentence, avoid extradition, walk away free. But Washington was watching now, and Washington wanted blood. The DEA began pressuring the Colombian government aggressively. They demanded arrests, they demanded raids, they demanded extraditions, and then came the blow Cali never expected. The presidency they believed they had bought betrayed them. President Ernesto Samper, elected with millions of cartel dollars, now faced his own crisis. The DEA leaked recordings linking his campaign to cartel money. International outrage exploded. Samper's political survival depended on one thing: turning against the Cali Cartel. He publicly declared war on the same men who had financed his victory. The betrayal hit Gilberto and Miguel hard. The coded phone calls, the late-night meetings, the envelopes filled with cash, the risks they took, all of it meant nothing. Samper stood on national television, raising a glass of champagne, celebrating Gilberto's arrest, a man who once delivered him loyalty, silence, and millions. The brothers felt something new that day. Not fear, anger, deep, burning anger. But anger doesn't stop a government. Anger doesn't stop the DEA. Anger doesn't stop a nation that has lost too much to the drug trade. Suddenly, Cali's largest advantage, corruption, no longer worked. Judges refused bribes. Police accepted money and still betrayed them. Politicians turned their backs. Every ally became a potential enemy. The empire was starting to crack. Safe houses were discovered, shipments were seized, money launderers were arrested, entire financial networks collapsed. And then came the worst blow of all, the one Cali never recovered from. Their own security chief, Jorge Salcedo, defected. The man who built their intelligence network, the man who protected their families, the man who knew every safe house, every accountant, every meeting, every weakness, walked into a DEA safe house and began to speak. And once he started, he didn't stop. Names, addresses, codes, bank accounts, operations, escape routes, schedules, private residences, everything. The man who was supposed to keep the cartel safe had just set its execution date. The clock struck 0, and the DEA prepared to take down the most powerful criminal organization on Earth. The Cali Cartel had always believed their greatest weapon wasn't guns or assassins or even cocaine. It was invisibility. They didn't live like kings. They didn't drive Rolls-Royces. They didn't throw extravagant parties or display gold-plated thrones. They kept their shirts tucked, their hair trimmed, their voices calm. Their empire was built on silence. But in 1995, the silence finally broke. After years of bribing politicians, paying off judges, controlling police departments, and running their operations like a Fortune 500 company, the Cali bosses woke up to a terrifying reality. Their allies were no longer answering the phone. Newspaper headlines no longer praised their legitimate investments. Police commanders who once protected them were now hunting them. Congressmen who once begged for donations now demanded their arrest. Colombia had changed. The world had changed. And the DEA wasn't looking for negotiations anymore. They wanted trophies. Inside a dimly lit office in Washington, a map of Cali hung on the wall. Red circles marked safe houses, blue dots marked suspected laboratories, green triangles marked known lieutenants, and in the center, 4 photos: Gilberto Rodriguez, Miguel Rodriguez, Jose Chepe, Santa Cruz Londoño, Pacho Herrera. Under each photo was a simple 2-word label, target priority. And for the first time in their lives, the Cali bosses felt something unfamiliar, not fear, but inevitability. They could buy silence, they could buy loyalty, they could even buy a presidency, but they couldn't buy time. The first signs of collapse came quietly. A money courier disappeared with $15 million. A mid-level accountant fled to Miami seeking protection. A trusted political ally was caught on tape accepting bribes. A warehouse full of cash went missing overnight. Every betrayal was a new crack in the foundation. Every lost dollar was a warning that the empire was rotting from within. But no betrayal was more devastating than the one delivered by Jorge Salcedo. To the DEA, he wasn't just a witness, he was a nuclear weapon. He knew passwords, he knew offshore accounts, he knew where the bosses slept, ate, hid, traveled. He knew which vehicles were armored and which weren't. He knew which doors were fake walls and which rooms had panic buttons. He wasn't giving the DEA information, he was giving them blueprints. And once the DEA had blueprints, the countdown to destruction began. Gilberto Rodriguez, the legendary chess player, was the first to fall. For days, the police searched one of his safe houses, a mansion with secret doors, sliding walls and false floors. They found nothing. They were about to leave. Then a young officer leaned against a bookshelf, frustrated, and the bookshelf moved. Behind it was a narrow compartment, hidden, soundproof, and barely wide enough for a man. Inside it, sweating, exhausted and defeated, was Gilberto Rodriguez. "I'm a peaceful man," he whispered as police dragged him out. Peaceful or not, he was done. His arrest sent shockwaves across the world. CNN broke the story. Colombian news replayed it on loop. Politicians congratulated each other. The DEA celebrated in private. But for the remaining Cali bosses, Gilberto's capture was more than a loss. It was a prophecy. If Gilberto could fall, then all of them could. Miguel Rodriguez panicked. He shifted safe houses every night. He slept with his shoes on. He didn't trust his guards. He didn't trust his lieutenants. He didn't trust his family. Every phone call might be monitored. Every car might be followed. Every step might be the one that leads to handcuffs. One night, during a meeting in a secure apartment, Miguel heard a faint rustling in the walls. Not outside, inside, behind the plaster. He froze. Was it rats, a loose wire, a draft, or was it the DEA installing a microphone? He never found out. He stopped using that apartment forever. Chepe Santa Cruz wasn't any safer. He was in Bogotá when he learned Colombian police were preparing a citywide raid. He escaped through the kitchen of a small restaurant, slipped out the back door, and spent the night hiding between two dumpsters. The next morning, a newspaper headline read, "The man who owns half of Cali was hiding in trash." It wasn't true. No one had seen him. But he read the headline again and again. It felt like a sign. The empire he built on discipline and silence had become a circus, and he was the clown running from the authorities. Then there was Pacho Herrera. He was calm. Too calm. He continued playing soccer on his private field. He continued hosting quiet meetings. He continued wearing his usual white shirts and dark sunglasses. But behind the calm was a truth he knew better than anyone. His enemies were not only the DEA, but thousands of Medellín loyalists seeking revenge. Every day of freedom was a gift, but even gifts have expiration dates. The four kings of Cali were now cornered from all sides. The DEA, the Colombian government, rival gangs, former allies, even their own men. Their empire was crumbling. Not with an explosion, not with a gunfight, not with a dramatic finale, but with a slow, suffocating collapse, the kind that kills an empire before it kills the men who built it. And as the walls closed in, only one question remained. Who would fall next? Gilberto's arrest was supposed to be impossible. For decades he moved like smoke, never leaving fingerprints, never staying in one house for too long, never trusting the same guard twice. He was the quiet brain behind the world's richest criminal organization. The man who once said, "A good boss is one the world doesn't even know exists." Now he was sitting in a concrete cell, staring at a wall, knowing the world finally knew exactly who he was. Miguel felt the blow hardest. For years he had relied on Gilberto's calm intelligence. Now he was alone with the walls closing in. Miguel knew the DEA had something they'd never had before, a man who understood every circuit, every alias, every escape route, every weak point. Jorge Salcedo. Salcedo didn't just betray them, he dismantled them piece by piece. The DEA no longer searched whole neighborhoods blindly. They searched specific buildings, specific rooms, specific floors, rooms with false walls, bathrooms with escape tunnels, garages with hidden doors. Salcedo gave them everything. Miguel switched safe houses every few hours. He stopped calling his wife. He stopped visiting his children. He slept with a pistol under his pillow, a bullet already chambered. And still, the DEA closed in. One night, while he was hiding in a luxury apartment complex, Miguel heard shouting outside, boots running, radios crackling. For a moment, he thought the raid was for him. It wasn't. The police were after someone else in the building, but that was enough. Miguel fled barefoot down the stairs, wearing nothing but pajamas and a panicked expression. He escaped through a service exit and disappeared into the night. The next morning, his face was on every newspaper in Colombia. The King of Cali runs like a fugitive. He had gone from billionaire businessman to hunted animal. The next to fall was José Chepe Santa Cruz. Unlike the others, Chepe didn't hide in Cali. He lived in Bogotá, running operations with precision and paranoia. His capture came unexpectedly, not from DEA intelligence, not from an elite operation, not from betrayal. It came from pure stupid luck. He was eating lunch at a quiet restaurant. A police patrol car parked across the street. 2 officers walked in, not looking for him, but for a stolen motorcycle reported nearby. Then one of them recognized Chepe's face. Chaos erupted. Chepe bolted toward the kitchen. Plates crashed. People screamed. A cook ducked behind a freezer. Outside, backup sirens filled the air. Chepe sprinted out the back door, slipped on wet pavement, and crashed onto the ground. Officers tackled him before he could stand. A man worth billions was captured behind a restaurant, lying in a puddle beside a pile of trash. When news reached Cali, Miguel burst into laughter, not because it was funny, but because everything had become too surreal to feel real anymore. But the fall wasn't complete yet. One man remained free, Helmer Pacho Herrera. Everyone expected Pacho to run. He didn't. He walked into a courthouse one morning wearing a crisp white shirt and sunglasses, calm as ever. He looked like a businessman arriving for a meeting, not a cartel boss surrendering to authorities. His reason shocked even the DEA. "I'm tired," he said simply. Tired of hiding, tired of shifting beds every night, tired of waiting for enemies, both government and Medellín loyalists, to kill him. He had survived the war against Pablo. He had survived Los Pepes. He had survived internal betrayals, but he would not survive another decade of running. He surrendered quietly, handing over the last piece of Cali's empire with a small smile. That left only Miguel. For months he hid like a ghost, moving constantly, terrified of every sound. The DEA surrounded dozens of buildings, but he kept slipping away, until one morning officers received a tip from someone who knew him better than anyone, Salcedo. The DEA stormed a luxury apartment complex in Cali. They searched every unit, every closet, every crawl space, nothing. They were about to leave when one detective noticed a wooden panel near a bathroom sink. He knocked on it. It sounded hollow. He slid a screwdriver into the side of the panel and pried it open. Inside the cramped compartment, curled up, sweating, trembling, defeated, was Miguel Rodriguez, the man who once commanded billions of dollars, choked out 4 words: "Don't shoot, I surrender." Just like that, the last great king of Cali had fallen. The world's most powerful cartel, richer, more organized, and more politically connected than Pablo Escobar could ever dream of, collapsed not in a blaze of glory, but in a series of quiet arrests, betrayals, and humiliating hiding places. The empire didn't die with a bang. It died with a whimper, one arrest at a time, one safe house at a time, one defection at a time. And by the end of 1995, the message was clear. The Cali Cartel was gone. But the story wasn't over, because in the shadows of their fall, something new was rising. A new kind of cartel. A cartel that didn't rely on bombs or chaos or corporate strategy. A cartel built on fear, discipline, and military precision. Mexico was watching, Mexico was learning, Mexico was preparing. And soon the world would face a new kind of empire, one far more violent than Cali and far more ruthless than Medellín. When the last Cali boss was placed in handcuffs, Colombia let out a long, exhausted breath, the kind of breath a country holds for a decade without realizing it. For years, Colombians lived under the shadow of 2 monsters: Medellín, chaotic, explosive, unpredictable; Cali, silent, calculating, everywhere. And now, for the first time in decades, both monsters lay dead or imprisoned. But the victory wasn't clean, and it wasn't complete, because when an empire falls, its ghosts remain. Gilberto Rodriguez sat in his cell writing letters, still calculating, still analyzing, still playing chess in his mind. He convinced himself that history would treat him as a businessman, not a criminal, a man who maintained order in Colombia. Miguel lived in paranoia even behind bars, convinced that rivals would poison his meals or attack him in the courtyard. His hair turned grey faster than anyone expected. Chepe Santa Cruz didn't last long. Months after his arrest, he tried to escape from a Bogotá hospital. It ended in a burst of gunfire. The man who once controlled drug routes across the Americas died on a cold floor, staring at the ceiling lights. Pacho Herrera survived longer, but not by much. In prison, he was relaxed, even respected, until revenge came knocking. A Medellín loyalist managed to infiltrate the prison and assassinate him on a soccer field. One shot to the head, one last score settled. And just like that, all 4 kings of Cali were gone. One imprisoned for life, one dead on a hospital floor, one ambushed on a soccer field, one living quietly in an American prison cell. The empire they built dissolved almost instantly. Their labs were seized, their money couriers arrested, their accountants flipped, their political allies distanced themselves, their partners in Mexico turned to new suppliers. Cali disappeared from the cocaine market faster than anyone predicted. Some called it justice, some called it karma, some called it the natural end of power built on corruption. But the truth is more unsettling. The fall of Cali didn't end the cocaine trade, it redirected it. With Colombia's giants gone, a power vacuum opened, one large enough to swallow nations. And waiting patiently in the shadows were the Mexicans, the Sinaloa Federation, the Gulf Cartel, the Juarez Cartel, the Tijuana Cartel. Groups that Cali once used as partners and transporters now became owners of the entire pipeline. For decades, Mexicans had watched the mistakes of Colombia. Medellín taught them that chaos brings destruction. Cali taught them that money buys time, but not peace. Mexico learned both lessons well. What rose next would be more organized than Cali, more violent than Medellín, and more militarized than any cartel the world had ever seen. By the early 2000s, groups like Los Zetas and Sinaloa transformed the cocaine business into full-scale warfare. Armored convoys, anti-aircraft weapons, military deserters, global trafficking routes, billions in profits. What Cali built quietly, Mexico rebuilt loudly. And yet, somewhere in a dusty archive in Bogotá, there are old files filled with numbers, maps, and interrogation transcripts, quiet reminders of a time when 4 businessmen from Cali nearly controlled an entire continent. Not with bombs, not with terror, but with intelligence, corruption, and money. Their empire didn't end with a hero, or a battle, or a revolution. It ended because ambition has limits, even for men who believed they were untouchable. And in the end, every cartel, no matter how powerful, faces the same fate. It grows too big, it makes too much money, it leaves too many bodies, it attracts too much attention. Then the world turns, and the empire collapses. The Medellín cartel died in fire. The Cali Cartel died in silence. And now, decades later, the legacy of those men still echoes in every courtroom, every border checkpoint, every DEA briefing, and every news report about cartel violence. Crime empires don't disappear. They evolve, they migrate, they pass the crown to the next monster in line. But history remembers who came first, the gentlemen kings of Cali. Brilliant, ruthless, disciplined, invisible. They changed the world and then vanished from it.